Hello. How is everybody? It's a small live today, which is really kind of cool because we can actually interact a lot more. When the live chat's going crazy, it's really hard to talk and hang out. So this will be really fun tonight. Can everyone hear me? I always wonder. I always worry that I get on here and nobody can hear a word that I'm saying. I have really good internet, but sometimes it doesn't work, which is strange because it's supposed to be like some of the best internet, but you just never know. Okay, good. Happy Easter. I'm drinking some ginger tea. Okay. So I wanted to start out I want everyone to tell me what is your favorite. Not here. Oh, you can hear. Okay. What's your favorite thing to grow in your garden? I'd love to hear it. My favorite thing to grow is greens and lettuces. I spend a lot of money on greens and lettuces whenever I'm not growing those things. They're so easy to grow and so inexpensive to grow that they're just my favorite. And they taste unparalleled to what you can get at the grocery store. And you can grow them a huge portion of the year. Now, some people can grow them in the summertime. I have not been successful at growing greens and lettuces in the summertime, but I may try this year with shade cloth. I've never used that. So I'm curious if you guys have ever grown, like if you're in have warmer summers, though it gets hot even in the northern climates. Have you ever grown greens and lettuces successfully in the summertime? What am I trying to say? Sorry, I'm a little out of it. I'm still kind of tired from my week. But have you ever grown them successfully without them getting bitter or bolting? Both of those things happen usually. So what do we have here? Arugula, Swiss chard herbs. Yes, I'm with you. I have a bunch of spinach and arugula and herbs to plant and potatoes still. And I wanted to get it done this week so bad because this whole weekend has been rainy all day Friday, all day Saturday. And you guys know it's been like a beautiful, like gentle spring rain. And so it would have just made that stuff grow like crazy, way better than any hose could ever make it grow. But sadly, I did not get that stuff planted. I'm hoping to get it done tomorrow. It was raining all day today. I thought about going out there in the rain and planting it, but then I decided not to. I decided to stay warm and cozy and dry. Shishito peppers. I've never grown those. I have eaten them, but maybe this will be the first year. Green beans and winter squash, yes, because green beans and winter squash are so prolific and you really can grow enough for your family for a year. There are certain crops that I find that are a lot easier to grow massive quantities of, and those would be two that I would think I would put on that list. What else do we have here? I love that I can actually read what you guys are writing. This is so cool. Eggplants. I have never grown eggplants because we don't really eat them, but I think it would be fun to grow them because I never have. But we don't really eat eggplant. Maybe once a year, some eggplant parmesan. You know what I mean? So that's why I don't grow them. I'm always pretty practical with my garden. I would like to expand my mind a little bit, though, and be a little impractical sometimes. And I do get a little impractical with all of my flowers and stuff. But even those, like, I don't go too crazy. Anyway, what else are you guys? Sweet potatoes. Yes, I love growing sweet potatoes. And I'm going to talk about why I'm probably not growing them this year. Okay, I wanted to start off. You guys asked a lot of questions between Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. There were a lot of questions. There were a lot of repeats. There were some that I just honestly can't answer. They're so specific that you really need to ask somebody in your area and things like that. And then there were some interesting ones. So we're going to get to that. But first, I'm just going to start with the most asked questions that you guys asked me. Can anyone guess what the number one question was that I was asked? There's two that are kind of neck and neck. I'm curious if anyone can guess what it would be. I'm going to give you guys a minute to think about it. Um, but first, so I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm gonna go down the list and answer a different one. Will I grow herbs and flowers? Absolutely. If I wasn't trying to feed my family, all I would grow is herbs and flowers and probably fruit. I like growing vegetables. It gives me a real sense of accomplishment and pride, but it's not my favorite, you know? My favorite is herbs and flowers. As far as just fun things, I mean, herbs are more than fun. They're very practical, but honestly, I really like herbs just because they're beautiful. I like eating them, and I love making a meal where even like the flavoring I grew. But I grew a lot of herbs just because I like to look at them. uh how much to grow? A question about my neighbors. Yes. So the top two questions were where do I get the hoops that I put on my garden, the fiberglass rods? And the other one was, what about my HOA? Like, what do they think about the garden? What do the neighbors think about the garden? So I was going to answer these straight away because I keep forgetting to answer it in my videos. I get the reason I've never linked the rods below my videos is because I get them locally and I have scoured the internet, and maybe I'm not scouring it good enough, but I can't find anything that I feel like is the same thing. And I don't feel like I can recommend something unless I order it and use it. And so I might do that. I might order a couple things. And the other thing is that everything I've seen, I pay $2.99 per one of those rods. And everything else I've seen on the internet is drastically more expensive than that. So that was the other thing. Like, one, those fiberglass rods are perfect. Two, for the low tunnels or for holding up your netting. But two, they're only $3 a piece. And they were $3 a piece 5 years ago. They're still only $3. I was shocked. I went in a few weeks ago to get some, and I was only going to get a few. And I was like, how much? Because I assumed that they had like tripled in price. I was like, how much are these? They're like $2.99, and I bought all that they had in the whole store. So, and I've used all of them, and I need more. And then the other question was, so anyway, that's why I haven't linked those, is because I'm trying to find a comparable product to share with you guys. If you are in the Asheville area, I buy them from Fifth Season Gardening Center. So I actually had someone comment and say they've driven all the way up here from Atlanta to get them. They're pretty good. I should probably just ask them. Maybe I'll just call them and say, hey, where do you guys source these? That's what I should do. I don't know why I never thought about that till now. Okay. And then, okay, my HOA covenant isn't that strict from what I'm gathering from other people that live in HOAs. All it says about your yard and what you can grow is that you have to keep it tidy. It says reasonably tidy. So they're not even expecting perfection. Now, I have to say, everyone's yards are perfect. And my yard was so bad this week because I should have mowed like on Sunday or Monday last week. And then we were so sick, so I couldn't. And I paid someone to come over here and mow my grass for me because I just could not get to it. He has like a lawn service company, and he doesn't usually like come where I am and mow and all that, but he said that he would do it. So I was really grateful because it's like living in a neighborhood is mind blowing. Like having to worry about what your neighbors think. And I don't mean like what they think about my personhood, but it says in the HOA, like you have to keep your yard this way. And that's just very stressful that I can't get behind on my yard. I did buy a lawnmower. So that's good. I actually really like mowing the grass. It's not going to be a big deal. It's way smaller yard than my farm yard. And yeah, I have talked to the neighbors. None of the neighbors have been like, oh, I love your garden or anything. But what's really cool is that when I'm out there in the evenings watering, I meet all the neighbors. Or when I'm out there gardening, I meet the people, because people take walks. They walk their dogs. Everyone's walking their dogs. And so I've met quite a few neighbors just from being out there, which has been really neat. And no one said anything bad. Actually, this one lady that I've been chatting with, she was like, I asked her, what do you think the neighborhood will think about my garden? And she was like, what can anyone say bad about a garden? So she was older too, and she's lived here like 20 years. So that made me feel a little bit better. Okay, let's look at some of these. super chats here. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Banana Showtime. Thank you, Jenny Claypool. Oh, thank you for being a longtime viewer. It means a lot to me. And Paula Renee, what ratio soil to compost did you use in your garden? I'm going to answer this one, but I would like to get to the questions that I have pre-done because I've thought about the answers, but I would love to answer your question. I didn't really use a ratio, right? Because I didn't fill up a bed. I had soil there already. And then I had to make a decision of how much compost I was going to put on top. Buying all that compost was extremely expensive. It was a big investment. But I did it because I want to have a really good garden this year. It just means a lot to me. So I did it. Originally, I was going to put all 10 cubic yards on both sides of my garden, my spring garden and my summer garden. But then Justin Rhodes is filming like a homesteading show for Abundance Plus, and he said that the show would actually buy me enough soil for the other side, and that he recommended I put it all on one side. And so that being on the show, they would buy me the whole other side. I hate even sharing that because it sounds, I don't know. I don't like sharing things like that. But anyway, so I'm really grateful for that. It is kind of like payment for being on the show. It's also extremely generous. So what I decided to do, because I realized I was going to have enough compost to do this. Originally, I would not have had enough. If you have seed-free, weed seed-free compost, if you put 4 to 6 inches of that compost on top of your beds, like your in-ground beds or like raised rows, that's kind of what I have, raised rows. It's a great way to basically drastically reduce the weed pressure on your garden. So that's what I decided to do, since he was offering me that generous gift of putting it on the other side. So I can't offer you a ratio, because it seems like with a ratio, it's like you would either be like potting up plants or you would be filling a garden bed. And I wasn't filling garden beds. Now I will say this, that sounds like so bougie and expensive. I spent many years gardening where the first year of my garden at the farm, we just tilled it and planted, and our garden was great. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You can work at your garden over years and it'll be great. The next couple of years, we used old hay that we got for free from people in the area as mulch on top of the garden. And that, of course, created a ton of weeds, but it also created a ton of organic matter. And that is what started to regenerate our soil at the farm. And then as we had animals and made our own compost, sorry, I lost my train of thought looking at the chat. We regenerated it more. But I think I only bought compost for that garden one time, and it was a dump truck load off of Craigslist. It was way cheaper than the stuff I bought this year, but it was also really not that well broken down. And I'm really, really thankful that it didn't hurt my garden. So I'm just saying, like, if you're thinking, oh, well, I don't have all this money to put compost on top of my garden, I'm just going to encourage you that you don't have to do that. Gardens take time. They really do. And so don't be discouraged if you can't bust out a perfect garden like I have been blessed to do this year. And the only reason I've been able to do that is because of generosity of friends. That was not my expectation. I honestly, when I started this garden, had every intention of doing this very differently, but I've been offered this other way, and I'm really thankful for that. So there's that. Okay. KG, Premier One has 3-inch 4 foot. So 4 foot long rods, they're not long enough. Do they have longer ones at Premier One? I think mine are at least 7 feet. And they need to be that long, especially if you're covering brassicas. Now, if you're just covering greens, it depends. But if you're covering brassicas and cabbage, they need to be very long because they need to go wide and high. Otherwise, your brassicas are going to get squished down by the netting. And also, they're actually just going to grow up and push the netting up. And then the cabbage moths will come in and lay their eggs anyway. So, yeah. Rebecca Redis, you are always so kind to me. You're welcome, but thank you for being here. This is super fun for me. Okay, so that answers those 2 questions. Hoops for the garden, HOA. next big question was, how do you keep critters out? I'm not sure yet. Oh my goodness. I'm pretty stressed about it, to be honest. Right now what I'm doing is I'm literally putting netting over every single thing I'm growing. There are this little family of turkeys that have decided that my yard is the place to be now that they see me gardening, and I'm glad that I've covered everything. I have noticed that they've been lifting up the netting on the sides and pecking at some of my greens. So, and I haven't been out there in a couple days. Who knows what they look like right now. But right now, my plan is just to cover everything, which will work for all of the spring things that I'm planting, will not work for summer crops or for pumpkins and winter squash and all that stuff. So we'll see. My hope is to put up a non-permanent perimeter fence. My other hope is to come up with a really good plan for a really pretty garden fence and go to the HOA and present it to them and say, hey, this would actually be really pretty. I can plant flowers along the edge. It would just be really pretty, and I could do it in the style of the neighborhood. And honestly, it would be so expensive, but I've been pricing things out, and I think that I could save up enough and do it by next year, maybe. We'll see. I think there's ways to do it for cheaper than what it looks like by doing it yourself, basically. So honestly, a perimeter fence around the garden is how I would keep critters out. Right now, I am rigging it, and what I'm hoping to do, Premier One makes a 68 inch, so 5'8" semi-permanent netting fence for keeping deer out. It is really expensive though, so we'll see. We will see what happens with that. I am trying to figure out ways to make it less expensive, but I don't have it yet. I'm just figuring it out. Cook up the turkeys. We'll all come for dinner. Yeah, that would be nice. The cool thing too about that Premier One deer fencing is that the bottom parts of the fencing are smaller to keep out like rabbits and stuff. So that'd be cool. I would much rather though have like a pretty fence around the garden because it would just be so nice. Will I be planting fruit trees and berry bushes? Yes. I don't know if it'll happen this year. I'm hoping though that by this fall, I'll be ready to do that. There is a lot of landscaping that's already been planted around the property line. And so I'm hoping to pull a lot of that out and plant apple trees, cherry trees, blueberry bushes, blackberries, raspberries, all that stuff, and just make it like a privacy hedge, but it's all edible. Wouldn't that be fun? And it would be really pretty because in the spring it would all blossom. It would be so pretty. That's my plan. It'll be a little bit at a time though. It's a lot of ground to cover. My neighbor across the street has a little orchard though, and it's really beautiful. He's lived here 25 years, so his trees are much more mature. He does have some newer stuff. A lot of people ask in the video, I see one of your neighbors has a fence, and that's that neighbor. I think that and then there's backyard fences. You're allowed those, but just not front yard fences. But he's lived here probably since before this was an actual neighborhood. I think that's why he has that fence. Someone asked me, now that I am in a different zone, because I'm farther south, what can I grow here that I couldn't grow at my old place? And it's not that much different really, but two things that I want to try to grow here that you could only grow during really mild winters is figs. Figs are my favorite fruit. And we do have a fig tree at the farm. And it did produce sometimes, like if our first frost came really late in the season, or if the winter was just super mild, we would get a harvest of figs. Actually, the summer the babies were born, we got figs that year. But anyway, and peaches. So I'd like to grow some peaches. I do think peaches will grow in this zone, which I'm in 7A. So Um, which perennials am I going to put in? So other than like fruit trees and stuff, I'm planning to plant rhubarb, strawberries, and asparagus. And unfortunately, this is so funny. When I was planting my garden, I just totally forgot about adding that dynamic into my garden space. But I have another little area that I can till up. And so a friend is coming in like a couple weeks, and he's going to till up this one area for me, and I'm going to plant my strawberries and asparagus there, and rhubarb too, probably. So that'll be good because I have strawberry plants coming from a friend of mine. Will I plant starts or direct sow? So I made a whole video about that. You can check that out. But I do both. I do a lot of buying starts, but there's a lot of things that you can direct sow. So I'll be doing both. I will be direct sowing radishes, carrots, what else? Sugar snap peas, snow peas, green beans. If I grow corn, squashes, pumpkins, all of that gets direct sown. Cucumbers, typically I'll direct sow. Sometimes I'll do plant starts. It just depends on what's going on. If someone offers me 20 cucumber plants, I'm like, heck yeah, I'll take your cucumber plants. What else? Greens can all be direct sown. This year I'm doing a mix of plants or starts and direct sowing that. Now this is in my zone 7A. You'll have to check out your own zone to know exactly like what you can direct sow and plant starts or, transplant out. Do I grow my own plant starts? I currently don't, and I actually never have. Actually, that's not true. I think my first 2 gardens, I did plant starts, and I had no idea what I was doing. Actually, my very first garden, I lived right in Asheville, but I had a big yard. And how old was I? Very young, maybe 9. No, I was in my early 20s. And I thought, hey, I'm going to grow a garden. So I went to Lowe's. I bought the little plastic kit, with the little soil pods in it and the little greenhouse cover. I bought seeds. I started carrots. I didn't know. I started everything. And at one point, I don't even know how much access I had to the internet at this point. There was definitely not smartphones then. I don't even think we had internet at our house, and I definitely did not own a computer. So I must have gotten a book or something. But I went outside, I dug up some soil. It probably wasn't even close to full sun. Like, I'm pretty sure it was pretty shady. Planted all that stuff, was so excited. The next day I went out there and every single bit of it was gone. Every single bit. Every single thing I planted had been eaten by a groundhog. So that was my first garden. Total fail. I just tell you that story because it's funny, but also maybe that's where you're at, and just know that like we can be total failures and still totally become successful at stuff. I don't consider myself like the most epically successful gardener, but I do really love it. And I have learned how to grow enough food for my family to feed them. So that makes me really happy. Okay. I think that is the end of the most asked question list. Oh, here's another one. See, we've got front and back. We got notes here. This helps keep my brain straight. Sandra Thompson. Hey, from Asheboro. Hello. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm not always going to read it out loud because sometimes it feels like reading, like a card out loud, even though everybody can see it. So Cindy in the comments is saying she bought pipe at Lowe's to make the hoops. Works great. What kind of pipe? Was it like PVC pipe? Like what kind of pipe was it? And Banana Showtime says, if I wrote a garden book, you'd buy it. It would be so basic. It would be like the most basic garden book. Drama Fan 24 says baking eggshells helps break it down so it can't be available. So you probably mean so it can be available sooner. Yeah, I just bake my eggshells because it makes them break up really fine, and also because then it's not like I'm not exposing my kids to pathogens because I know that it's all been zapped by the heat. So that's why I do it. Banana Showtime, you need a basic book. I get that. Yeah, I just saw someone talking about figs. Where did your comment go? Okay. Oh, I think one other question was, how do I water my garden? So where I live is typically extremely wet. There are places very close to me that are considered deciduous, I think temperate rainforests. Not necessarily exactly where I live, but like 20 minutes away. So we typically get a ton of rain. And I have found that most years, obviously not every year, as long as I get everything watered in, I rarely have to water in the summer. There may be a month of the summer where I have to go out and water because we're having I can't even call it a drought, but we would call it a drought, but it's really not one. So that is the answer to that. But I just have hoses. I do have well water that is filtered also, which actually I'm starting to realize that like the filter, I'm not loving it because it takes the minerals out of the water, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, I'll just water with my hoses. That's another discussion too, like hoses and toxins and all this stuff. But I'm really grateful that I have well water. Before I knew for sure that I had well water, I was researching filters you could put on hoses in order to water your garden that filtered out like fluoride and chlorine and things like that, because I really didn't want to spray my garden with city water, to be honest. But I didn't end up having to do that, so I'm really grateful. Some people ask, how am I able to plant already without a greenhouse? So there is a common misconception in gardening. And I had the same misconception. And when I learned this, what I'm about to tell you, I was amazed. And maybe this is why the spring and the fall garden and really even the winter garden are my favorite, because I went most of my life thinking that you could only garden in the summer. And that's true of large parts of the world. But in my zone, we have 4 seasons, pretty equally divided, and there is a lot of things that I can grow in the spring and in the fall, and I can even, if I cover with low tunnels and row cover, I can harvest through most of the winter. So, yeah, spring gardens are great. Cold hardy crops are just absolutely magnificent. And honestly, I didn't even plant on time. Like I already know people who are harvesting radishes and chard and kale, like huge bunches, um, because they planted weeks ago and are already having their harvest. And hopefully next year, that's where I'll be at, already harvesting right now. But I'm still really grateful that I have my garden. I can get everything in the ground and still have a spring garden because it really is my favorite. Actually, my favorite's the winter garden because you've got no bugs, you got no weeds, you're just harvesting. And you go out in December and pick a salad or go get kale and make breakfast. And you can feel those vitamins just like going into your body in the bleak midwinter, My favorite isn't the summer garden, except the summer garden, you get a whole lot of flowers. So that's what makes the summer garden so nice. And then some other people ask, will I grow vertically? Yeah, I will be doing some vertical gardening. I think just for fun, because I want to make my garden look pretty. I'm typically a pretty practical gardener, and I know vertical gardening is practical, but I've also just kind of like learned the way I do things, and learning new things right now is honestly really difficult for me because my brain is so overloaded all day, all the time. But yeah, I plan to do some fun like cattle panels and, doing the arch with the cattle panels. I'll probably grow my cucumbers that way. Um, if I do pole beans, I'll grow them similar to that. but I usually grow bush beans. I want to grow loofah. We'll see if I get a harvest, but I was kind of thinking I would grow the loofah in my front rock garden and then like grow it along the front of my house. I just thought that would be really fun because I don't really want to take up precious garden space with loofah. Um, but that would be fun to do that. So that's what I'm thinking. A lot of people saying ask Justin for his fencing. So thank you for suggesting that. I've already gone over there a couple weeks ago and checked it out, but it's really poultry fencing, and it won't keep out deer. So I appreciate you guys saying that, and he did offer me that, but it won't work for what I need it for. Sorry for saying so much. It's hard doing lives in the sense that like I'm like, okay, what's the next thing I'm gonna say? What else? Oh, so usually when I grow my tomatoes, I grow indeterminate tomatoes. And we're going to get into what that is in just a minute. But you would grow those vertically. So if you've ever seen my old gardening videos, I had these really cool tall bamboo structures. And then I would put string across them and down and grow the tomatoes up the string because indeterminates are vining and they grow way up the string and they just keep growing. It's pretty wild. Okay. All right, let's get into tomatoes. Let's get into them. You guys asked some really specific questions about tomatoes, some which I can answer and some which I can't. So I'm going to tell you what I can and can't answer. People are asking about determinate versus indeterminate. So an indeterminate tomato is exactly what it sounds like. It's undetermined, like how much it'll grow. It's a vine. The thing just keeps going. I would love to see a tomato in like its original habitat, its original environment. Like, what does that look like? Would that not be amazing? Like an indeterminate tomato. Now, I am not a fancy tomato grower. Like, I don't grow 20 varieties. I typically grow, oh goodness, y'all, my computer's about to die. Let me go plug it in. Where is the charger? I don't even know if it'll reach. Sorry, guys. Okay. I have to change my setup a little bit to reach the cord. Okay, so indeterminates will, goodness gracious. Let me pull my table closer. That's why they call this alive, right? Because it's real life. Sorry about that. Okay, so an indeterminate is a vine and it'll just keep growing. And in the past, I've pretty much mostly grown indeterminates. I would grow Amish paste tomatoes, and I enjoyed growing those, but I have found that indeterminates are a ton of work. One, because they just keep growing, so you have to just keep pruning them to keep them healthy, to keep them from blighting. But also, the tomatoes come on real slowly throughout the whole season. So unless you've planted enough plants, like you have to pick them and then freeze a batch. You can't like make up and can a batch. You don't have enough to do like a whole batch. And so that's something I don't love about them. But then that's also something you might love about them is that they come on more slowly. You are getting tomatoes all season. Um, so because they're good producers. Then you've got the determinate variety, which a lot of people will call like a bush tomato. And that's what it looks like, is like a bush. Think about like pole beans versus bush beans. It's a similar concept. It's very similar concept. And I think the main determinate variety I've grown are San Marzanos. And the reason I grow these varieties is because they're good for sauce. Like I said, I'm a very practical vegetable gardener, and I'm like, what can I grow that's going to give me the most food for my family? And it's going to be the simplest to grow. So that's the difference between those two. Very basic difference. Let me see. Oh, the other thing is with the determinants is that the fruit will pretty much all come on the same time. I mean, not exactly. It's not going to be already on the same day, but within a window. It's not going to go and go and go the whole season. I mean, you might have like a couple tomatoes at the end of the season, but you're going to get like a big harvest all at once. And then you can just can it all and get it all done at once. So that's another reason to maybe consider determinate over an indeterminate. Now, I meant to look up which typically produce more. I feel like I did look it up, but I can't remember what I found out. It probably just depends on variety. Everything is always going to depend on variety, how well you care for it, how fertile your soil is, things like that. Was it a good tomato year? What was the pest pressure? What was the weed pressure? Gardens are never the same from year to year. Okay. So here's how I treat my tomatoes. Because it's so wet here. Another thing that will determine your harvest is the heat. So in my experience, if we're having a cooler summer, which I live in the mountains, so you just never know. It could be a hot summer, but it could be a cold, wet summer. And if it's a cooler, wet summer, I'll practically get no harvest because tomatoes blight really easily. And from my experience, that blight comes from them being wet and the leaves getting wet and things like that. And so if we're having a colder, wetter summer, they'll just blight and die. A lot of people here, as a matter of fact, Lan Trier, who is my moderator, she grows her tomatoes in a hoop house because she can control the factors, she can control the heat, she can control how wet they get, and she has a more extended harvest because of that as well, because her frost date will be pushed back because she has her frost will be pushed back because she has the hoop house. So one really important thing with tomatoes is that you keep them pruned, meaning that they're going to look like something from, why is my brain not working? Cat in the Hat. Who wrote Cat in the Hat? Help me out here. Help my brain work. Dr. Seuss. They're going to look like something from a Dr. Seuss book because you're going to cut off all of the leaves below the first fruit. And then as things start to ripen, you're going to cut off more leaves and more leaves and more leaves. And it's going to look like this long, skinny plant with a bunch of fruit coming off the sides and no leaves. And then all these leaves at the top. And you do that for a couple reasons. Like it creates a lot of airflow between the plants, which reduces like fungus and things like that. It also keeps the leaves of the plant dry because you're not having that water splash up off the ground onto your tomato leaves and blighting them. It's also going to keep it easier for you to spot pests. Like you're going to be able to see a lot more clearly like what's happening with your plants so that you can easily pick off and first notice if there's tomato hornworms, let's say, but even other pests, and you can just pick them off because you'll be able to, it's so like you want to keep your tomatoes really like spaced really well, but then also pruned really well. You can just see better. You can see what's happening better. Does that make sense? I always water them from the bottom. So I never like spray my tomatoes with a hose, right? Like when I go out and water right now, everything gets soaking wet. I'm just like spraying it everywhere. But whenever I water tomatoes, I point the hose at the bottom of the plant, like right on the soil. and so that that water doesn't splash up onto the leaves of the plant. Um, I wrote here, prune them, water from the bottom, give them space, and then pray. So that's what I do. I'm like, let me have some tomatoes. I personally feel like tomatoes are a ton of work, and sometimes you just don't get a great harvest. And sometimes I even wonder, is it worth growing these? Because they take up so much space in my garden, especially because I can get organic tomato sauce for like $2 a jar at Aldi. Maybe that's gone up, but it used to be like $1.99. So like the jars and the sauce are $2. Why am I growing tomatoes that I may not even get a harvest from? But there is like the pride in doing it, and it's fun and it looks really beautiful, and you can share the tomatoes and get to eat them fresh. And obviously, homegrown is always yummier, and you can control what ingredients are in there. So that's my tomato spiel. I'm going to look in the comments and see if there's any more questions. If I can answer them, I will. Like I said, I'm very practical with tomatoes. I might grow like one cherry tomato and then like a couple of other slicing varieties just for fun to eat fresh. But mostly I grow a paste tomato variety for canning. And the paste tomato varieties are good for canning because they have less juice. So you get a lot more flesh to make like tomato sauce and stuff with. Or no, what am I talking about? They're less seedy. So you get a lot more flesh to make tomato sauce and stuff with. Sandy says it's either the year of the tomatoes or it isn't. And I totally agree with you. Chelsea says, I'm in Southern California and tomatoes grow like weeds here. Biggest problem is critters snacking. Homegrown tomatoes taste the best. Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys a story. I used to not like tomatoes at all. And I just thought that they were so disgusting. I liked tomato sauce and ketchup, but I didn't like a tomato to just eat one. And when I was, how old was I? 20? I think I was 20 years old. I lived in Northern California, actually in like a community. And we would, not like a cult, just like a community. And we would trade our physical work to a local farm in exchange for meat and vegetables. And so I volunteered for that job because I thought it'd be super fun, and it totally was. And I remember walking, it was one of the first days we were there, walking through the tomato patch. And the guy was like, hey, you should try a tomato. And I was like, I don't like tomatoes. And he's like, it was like the guy that ran the farm. He's like, you'll like these. So I reached down and picked one. It was aroma of some sort. And he's like, just take a bite. And I was like, okay, I took a bite. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe how good a tomato could taste. I couldn't believe it. That same summer, I tasted raw corn straight off the stalk for the first time. Picked it, peeled it back, ate it. And I had never really liked corn before either. And I ate it and I could not believe how sweet and how delicious it was. It felt like, I don't know, it felt kind of scandalous. It felt like a treat. It felt like dessert. It felt incredible. And I would say that's probably when my interest in growing food began. Did I have any clue what that meant or how to do it or what I was in for? No. But was my mind completely opened to that there was this whole other world that I had never experienced? Yes. I mean, I had a great childhood and growing up, but like we didn't farm or garden or anything like that. Like I lived in a suburban neighborhood, went to public school, played sports, did clubs, all that stuff. And so I feel like that time in Northern California was when my interest in farming and gardening really started. Not like a cult. Yeah, it really wasn't. It was really not a cult. Okay. Angela says she's growing German lunchbox tomatoes. Ooh, I would love to. I might look that up and see what that is. Wade says when he was a kid and over the summer, he would something with his dad and they would have a sandwich and some stewed tomatoes from a can, and that is why I love tomato juice. He says some people wouldn't like it. Yeah, it's interesting, how we connect food with memories and with comfort. It's just really interesting to me. Like, I think about what will my kids think in the future, like when they're adults. These years of farming and gardening and growing their own food and them experiencing like the full cycle of it for the older kids for a huge part of their childhood. Um, what is that? I think that'll be really good memories for them. And I think there'll be certain flavors and tastes and experiences that they will totally connect with like happiness, and with comfort. That makes me happy. Okay, on to the next thing. Okay, there were a lot of questions about my specific garden, and I don't know if I don't want to be redundant because I've made videos about this, but I still would like to just quickly go over my garden. So my garden is specifically, I think it's what people would call like a raised row garden. They may even consider it a market garden, but honestly, my rows are too far apart really to be a market garden. But basically what that means is that I don't have raised beds, right? Because raised beds come pretty high off the ground. But what I did was what I had done was I had the garden tilled and then dug up into beds that are raised up off the ground. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it is just organized. It looks nice that way. It's tidy. It's efficient. Two, when you have distinct rows and distinct paths, it's a lot easier for children to help you in the garden. Because it's very clear to them about where you don't walk and where you do walk. Another reason for that is just it helps. What's the word? I'm losing my word, y'all. I was sleep deprived this week. It helps with erosion. So your water isn't going to just like run straight down your garden and erode your soil, right? Because you have these hills and these dips and then I have drainage straight down the middle of my garden where my middle path is. So one reason for that middle path is access to both sides of the garden, but I didn't have to make like two sides of the garden. But I chose to do that mainly because one, I like the way it looks. I like the way that it's organized that way, but it's also very practical in that it creates a drainage system for water, which is important here because we get a lot of rain. And anyways, I kind of lost my train of thought, but what's another reason? So if it was more of a market garden style, as far as like, I think the only thing that makes it really different from a market garden style is like the width of the beds versus the paths. But it's a way to grow a very efficient garden. It's a way to grow a lot of food in less space. So if I had put raised beds out there, one, it would have been extremely expensive to fill them. Two, I would have way less growing space because having that many structures, then you've got to have space between them all on every side. And then instead, I just have long rows, so there's less space between everything, or like dead space between everything. So it's like a raised row system. Does that make sense? Feel free to ask some questions if I didn't explain that well. The other thing that's cool about it is that if you maintain those beds, which it's pretty easy to do that, you don't have to till again. You can just keep adding organic matter on top. Maybe each year you'll add some more mulch to the paths, or maybe you'll dig out the paths some to, bring your hill up a little higher or your row up a little higher, but you don't have to till. So if all you do is till your garden and then don't do anything else to it, you'll have to re-till the next year. Now, granted, if you till it plant it, and then cover it with Silage Sharp, you won't have to retail the next year. But if you don't maintain it, you will. And just having the raised rows makes it a lot easier to maintain, to not have to till it, if that makes sense. It's just really efficient. And it also looks really nice and tidy, which I like. Rebecca Retta says that raised garden beds also have to be replenished every couple of years, maybe 3 years with new soil. That's true. And also, raised rows do too, in a sense. Like, you got to keep adding organic matter on top. But not as much as you would probably with raised beds. I've actually never had like raised beds. I just know what I've read and what other people have experienced. But the other thing with raised beds is that it's a lot harder to keep them watered. So raised rows, they just hold moisture because they're still part of the ground. Whereas raised beds, watering them, it just takes a whole lot more water to keep everything watered well. So that's another reason I prefer the raised rows personally. Less expensive, more efficient, easier to take care of. Well, raised beds would be easier to weed and stuff. Okay, so that's my system. The size of my garden right now is 48 feet by 58 feet. I have like 20, how long are my beds? They're like 22 feet by 3 feet. I have like 22 of them. And then I've got a 4-foot path down the middle. So that makes 22 and 20. Those numbers may be slightly off by like a foot, but I haven't measured it since it's been tilled. But what I measured out for them to till was 48 by 58. But, he probably tilled a little bit farther than that, which is fine. And then when he comes, so my friend is coming to till, well, it's really my friend's husband is coming to till in like a week or so. We're going to extend. So I don't know if you've seen my videos, but there is like one raised bed right in the middle of my yard. And above that, he's going to till all of that right there. And that's going to actually become my strawberries and asparagus and stuff. I wish I had already had him do it. I feel kind of silly for not already doing that. Okay, what do I plant in my spring garden? This really doesn't vary that much. Now, I've had to make some pretty hard decisions this year about what's going to go in my garden because it is a lot smaller than any garden I've ever grown, or any garden I've grown since having a bunch of children and trying to actually feed them out of it. So I can't grow everything that I would usually like to grow. And I definitely can't grow a year's worth of everything that I would usually try to grow a year's worth of. I'm gonna take my gum out. But what I am planting in my spring garden are onions, potatoes, peas, lettuces, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, and radishes. I'm not going to plant beets, turnips, or rutabaga. And I'm not really going to plant a whole bunch of different variety of lettuces and stuff or greens. I'm just going to plant Swiss chard. I'm going to plant kale. I'm going to plant romaine lettuce. I'm going to plant some baby greens, spinach, and arugula. I'm just trying to keep it very concise. Now, what's really cool, though, is that I can replant all that stuff in the fall. So we can eat it again. I'm not going to plant a year's worth of carrots right now. We'll just have some for eating on. But come late summer, I hope to plant an entire row of like a whole, 20-something foot row of carrots. And of course, there'll be multiple rows within that row. So I am hoping, if things go well, that I can plant a year's worth of carrots to grow this fall. And it's better to grow them in the fall because 1, carrots get sweet with cold. 2, you don't have to store, I say a year's worth, but if you think about it, like, you don't need a year's worth of carrots, right? Because you can grow, at least where I live, you can grow them in the spring and in the fall. So you only need enough from fall to spring. That's not a whole year. So we'll have some for the summer for eating, and then we'll grow like our storage carrots this fall, Lord willing. I've learned that I don't know what's going to happen, but those are my plans. As the other thing, my broccoli and cabbage, I didn't plant a year's worth of broccoli and cabbage for the spring harvest, because then I would have to preserve it now, and I would also have to, like, the cabbage, like the way you preserve it is kind of like a root cellar, which I don't have one. So I need to read about how I'm going to preserve it. And so if I'm going to grow a year's worth of cabbage, I'm not going to do that until the fall. I just grew enough for us to enjoy and eat on for the spring and early summer. The broccoli out in my garden, that will last us, through the summer and early fall. And then hopefully, I'll plant 2 or 3 rows of that this fall. And if it does well, I'll put it up and it'll last us till this next spring. Let me see. And then now the onions, some things that you plant, at least where I live, you just plant it once and done. So onions, you just hit it all at once. So I planted 260 onions. I think that'll do me fine. I think I have planted more like 350 in the past. So we'll see. Maybe it won't last the whole year, but who knows? Because they won't all be big and they won't all do perfectly. But I feel like that's a good number to start with. I feel like in the past, though, I've needed like 350, but I only planted 1 row of them. Potatoes, once and done. I'm going to plant 4 rows of potatoes. That probably won't be quite a year's worth, but it'll get us through the winter. So that's good. In the past, I have needed how many? I figured it out earlier. Or I reminded myself. I forget some of these numbers because it's been a couple years since I've done this. But I feel like in the past, we needed like 300 pounds, 350 pounds of potatoes to get us through the winter. So in my other garden, I would plant 4 30-foot rows of potatoes. And that would usually, give or take some, that would, between that, and then I would also plant, though, 4 rows of sweet potatoes. So that was another, 150, 200 pounds. That would get us through the winter. But as far as like white potatoes, I feel like we would need like 300 pounds. Now, I'm not planting 4 30-foot rows. I'm planting 4 22-foot rows. So it probably is not, depending on the yield, depending on how well they do, it's not going to be enough for like a whole year, but it'll be significant, Okay. Something I wanted to touch on, because I realized when I was writing this down that me saying, because I do have a very big garden, and I realized, like, here at this house, I realized when I was like thinking that there are people who have much smaller gardens, and it may be super discouraging to them whenever I say my garden's too small. And I just really don't want you to be discouraged by me saying that. The thing is like all of our goals are different. And so I'm having to adjust my goals, right? In the past, my goal was to try to grow a year's worth of as many crops as possible, or a winter's worth of as many crops as possible to feed my family. And those are still my goals, but I'm realizing I really don't have the space to do that with every crop. So I'm having to adjust my goals, and I just want to encourage you that, like, if your garden is really small and you're discouraged by me saying, "Oh, my garden's too small," then please don't be. Like, just look at your own situation and think about your own goals and how to reach your own goals, and like be encouraged. Please be encouraged. Yeah. So speaking of changing my goals, typically I would try to grow, I think I mentioned this already, the tomatoes. Like, there's just no way I can grow enough tomatoes in that garden without taking up most of my summer garden. I just can't grow enough. So what I'm actually thinking about doing this year is not even trying to do that, and just planting a bunch of different fun varieties to have something really beautiful growing, and just to make it kind of fun, and kind of just grow tomatoes for fun this year. I'm kind of thinking that's what I'm going to do. Because there's really no point in trying to grow a year's worth of tomatoes. There just isn't. I'm also trying to decide if I'm going to grow a year's worth of corn. So in my other garden, it took 4 30-foot rows to grow a year's worth of corn for us, sweet corn. And yeah, that's just not going to be possible in this garden, most likely. I mean, I think what I could do is like pick one. Like I could pick tomato or pick corn. I just haven't decided which one yet. Really good corn is really hard to find in January. Decent tomato sauce is not that hard to find. So I'm kind of leaning towards growing corn, not tomatoes, or not as many tomatoes. I'm also not sure about sweet potatoes. They're one of my favorite things to grow. I just feel like I'm digging up treasure whenever I harvest sweet potatoes. I love the way they look in the garden. They're so beautiful. So I'm considering trying to grow 4 rows of sweet potatoes this year, even though it's going to take up a huge amount of my garden space. And then I'm hoping that I can still grow a year's worth of winter squash. We're talking about all about summer garden. Because I have a different area of the yard where I feel like I could grow winter squash, and I'm going to try to do that. So we'll see. These are my maybe goals. I haven't solidified everything yet. And I also in all of this have to consider storage and preservation. And if I grow a year of this, how am I going to preserve it here at this house? Now, my hope and my goal is to I have a really great crawl space, and I do believe that I could turn part of that into an incredible place to store root crops and canned goods and things like that. But I have to be realistic with myself. Like, is that going to happen this year? Probably not. I don't know how to build anything. I would have to pay someone to do that, buy the supplies, all that. So yeah, like I got to think about that when I'm thinking about growing a year's worth of sweet potatoes and potatoes. Like, is that realistic? And yes, you can can potatoes, but for me, the allure of growing a year's worth of potatoes is that they don't have to be canned. And I get it, like canning them makes them a convenience food, but I think a potato is pretty convenient. Like you grow it, you cure it, you stick it in the root cellar, you get it out, you wash it, you throw it in the oven. It's like, to me, potatoes are convenience food, just the way that they are. So if I have to can them in order to preserve them, I'm not sure that I'm interested, to be honest. Still thinking and figuring all this out. We will see. Okay. I'm going to pause. We have been talking for over an hour. Do you guys know, I was planning to stop at an hour, but do you guys want to keep going? I have so much more to talk about. The thing is, a lot of these topics, we could talk about like one of them for hours. So they're big topics. They're really big topics. I did want to hit on a couple of things, but I just want to know if you guys want to keep going because we've already been at this for an hour. I'm good to go, but I just get it if you guys have to, if you guys need to go. Okay. All right. Everyone's saying yes. Let's keep going. We will. Moderators, I understand if y'all need to go to bed. Just let me know if you're leaving so that I can keep an eye on stuff. I'm trying to find, I've numbered my pages, but I can't. Page 2. Oh. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about what I've said so far? Because I'm about to get into how I know how much to grow for my family. Forgive me. Real life here. This is knock the cord out of the computer. Does anyone have any questions for me about what we've already talked about? Okay. Nobody does. Great. That must mean I'm a really great teacher. You have no questions. Okay. So, dang it. I keep losing my page. Oh, here it is. Okay. How do you determine how much you need to grow for your family? So, before you determine how much you need to grow for your family, you need to determine how much you eat. So, here's an example. If I was going to grow all the tomatoes for just tomato sauce. We're going to talk about salsa or roasted tomatoes or anything like that. If I was going to grow all the tomatoes for tomato sauce to can for my family, I would need to determine how many quart jars, because I would can it in a quart jar, how many quart jars of tomatoes I use a week. Okay. Then you would multiply that times 52 weeks, right? Tomatoes are one of those things that you would need like a whole year of pretty much. They're not like a spring crop that you would just need it through the winter. So this is just an example. Okay. Say I needed 2 jars per week. That would be 104 jars of sauce. Now, I've never actually measured this to know if these numbers are accurate, so I just got them off the internet. But what the internet says is that you need 3 pounds of tomatoes per jar. I've heard people even say 5 pounds per jar. And I wish Beth DeClerc, I don't know if Beth DeClerc is on here. She probably isn't, but if you follow her on Instagram, she's good, I feel like, at knowing that kind of stuff. So Beth DeClerc on Instagram, she's good usually at knowing numbers. But say it's 3 pounds. Okay, we'll just say it's 3 pounds. You would need 312 pounds of tomatoes, right? Just to can your sauce. Now, here's the hard part. What does the average tomato plant yield? Well, depends on the variety, depends on how well it's cared for, depends on how fertile your soil is, depends on a lot of things, depends on if it's a tomato year or not, depends on a lot of things. But say it's just like a normal tomato year. It's not a bumper crop. It's not a total fail. Then let's say you get, let's say you get like 10 pounds of tomatoes per plant, okay? That's going to say you need 31 plants to grow your tomato sauce for the year. I kind of feel like these numbers are off though, because I've grown about like 50 plants plenty of times, and that was never enough. I feel like for a family my size, you need at least 100 tomato plants for your tomato needs for an entire year. So that's one way you can do it. You can try to do it with math. But the other way, math is going to leave you like, I say start there. Start with math, okay? That's what I've always done. I started with math, but then you have to just experience it. So then it's going to be experience. You're going to start with math. But then it's really just going to take you time. It's going to take you year after year of figuring it out. And here's the thing, like say you plant too many tomato plants. That is not a problem because you can can extra. Say it is a bumper crop and you planted too many tomato plants. Well, the cool thing is that if you can that sauce, you can have it for a couple of years and maybe you'll plant less tomatoes the next year. So it's not a big deal to overplant unless it just takes up all of your space. But really, ultimately, you're going to start with some math. You're going to try that out. And then the next year, you're going to be like, you know what? This was just an average tomato year and that was too many. Or this was an average year and that was too few. So that's kind of how you're just going to start with the math, but then you're going to learn from experience. That's really the only way to do it. So here's another example, potatoes. The way I learned how to grow enough potatoes was I just planted a whole bunch of them. Now, I know that my family can easily eat a 10-pound bag of potatoes in one dinner. Especially if it's like mashed potatoes. Now, if it's baked potatoes or roasted potatoes, it's not that many, but like mashed potatoes, easy. So let's say we eat 10 pounds a week. I would say that's more average. I don't make mashed potatoes that often because they do take so many potatoes, and I try to be thrifty. And honestly, mashed potatoes are a lot of work. So I make a lot of roasted potatoes and baked potatoes. So say we eat 10 pounds a week. Well, I'll need 520 pounds. but we don't always eat potatoes every week. Now there are families who eat potatoes like 3 times a week, but we don't always eat potatoes every week. Plus then we've also got sweet potatoes. Plus we've also got winter squash. So I kind of use those things interchangeably in a lot of meals. But okay, so you would need 520 pounds of potatoes, right? 10 pounds a week, 52 weeks. But I typically, I never needed that much. So I don't think I've ever grown 520 pounds of potatoes anyway. I think I usually grow about 300 pounds. So I don't know if this is helping you guys at all, because honestly, it is just a lot of experience. You start with math and then you just start experimenting. And the wonderful thing about the garden, but also the frustrating thing about the garden, is that it's a slow process of learning. That's wonderful, because in an age where everything is fast, the garden makes you respect the process. It makes you slow down and be on the journey, I guess. I mean, I almost hate using that word because it's so overused, but you've got one shot a year. And so you have to slow down. And I actually think that's really great. So it takes a couple of years to figure out what's working for you and what isn't. So yeah. As far as like greens and stuff, how did I figure that out? I think for me with greens is that greens regenerate, they grow back, you know. You pick kale off a plant, it grows back. You pick baby greens, they grow back. So at least in the spring and summer. So you don't have to plant everything you're going to eat. It regenerates. Now, what you'll see is that in the fall, I will plant a lot more of greens and lettuces, because they don't regenerate in the winter. They don't grow back in the winter. They will grow back. Well, the lettuces won't, but the kales and stuff will grow back. You'll be amazed. Like my garden at the end of winter, my winter garden will look like mushy lettuce, because the lettuce got all mushy by the end of the winter. And then my kale will look like just like empty stalks. But a few weeks into spring and they start growing new kale. Kale is an amazing plant. Swiss chard is an amazing plant. To me, is like one of the most incredible, mind-blowing plants. Justin Rhodes says that kale is trying to kill you, but I totally disagree with him. I think it is one of the most incredible, miraculous plants that it just keeps feeding you. So what you'll see is that in the winter, I will grow a whole bed of just Swiss chard and kale, or like just kale, just Swiss chard, because we will literally eat it the whole entire winter because it doesn't grow back. But in the summer, I'll just plant a small part of a row with kale and with Swiss chard, because it keeps coming. It keeps growing back. And those are just things you're going to have to just figure out for yourself. I also have 7 children. So if you don't have 7 children, you don't need to grow as much food as me. And also, you just need to grow what you're going to eat. If you guys don't eat kale, if you don't like kale, don't grow kale just because I'm raving about how much I love it. Like, don't grow it if you're not going to eat it. Emily says, this is what you should do for your videos. Call it late night Bree chats. You could do almost all of them in one night to take the stress off. Thanks. That would be kind of fun. Okay. That was my simple and kind of vague answer to how do you know how much food to grow. Mostly experience. Mostly not growing enough or growing too much and be like, oh, okay, I can scale back this year, or there was an incredible crop. Like I've done that with green beans before. Like there was just such an amazing crop. I could grow half of that the next year. The cool thing about green beans too is that they keep producing. So you've got some plants that they just give you one harvest, onions, one harvest, potatoes, one harvest, some tomatoes, kind of one harvest. But then the indeterminates just keep going. Corn, one harvest. But then you've got plants like green beans, kales, lettuces. They just keep producing until they get too bug eaten, or just, they just finally fizzle out and are done. Winter squash is like that. Summer squash is like that, right? It just keeps going. It just keeps producing until the plant finally fizzles out. It either gets just like overrun with bugs or overrun with like some kind of fungus or something. But it just keeps going. And it's really incredible to me that there are plants that do that. I mean, I didn't know that before I started gardening. I didn't know that, And so as I've learned these things over the years, it has blown my mind at how productive gardens can be, and especially certain plants. Like I feel like corn should be a delicacy because you have this huge plant and you get how much fruit? Not much, considering how much energy it's taking to grow that fruit. So I just kind of feel like corn should be honestly a delicacy. Especially sweet corn. Well, probably dent corn too. But do you hear what I'm saying? You've got lettuce, which is just this tiny little plant, and it just keeps producing. But then corn is like kind of like a redwood tree compared to the little lettuce, and it gives you 2 ears of corn. And if you're growing it organically, the caterpillars have eaten the whole top of it off, and you have to cut that part off anyway. So that's fascinating to me. Someone's saying broccoli too. It depends. You mean like broccoli has such a big plant, but you just get the one harvest? Yeah, it's interesting. Some broccoli puts off shoots and you do get multiple harvests. But what I've experienced is that sometimes those shoots are super bitter. Like if it's gotten too far into the summer, the shoots won't be any good. Like you can't eat them. They're just bitter. But all of that for me, in my experience, depends on how cool of a spring and early summer we have. I have loved the years where I not only got a big crown, but then I got all these broccoli shoots too. That's super nice. Those are super good years. I love it because I love to eat broccoli. I love to grow broccoli. Okay. Where are we going? Where are we going next? Oh, I feel like this is a really fun, what flowers you're going to grow. I was just about to talk about that. So a lot of people ask, what flowers and herbs do I intermix with my garden? I'm going to give you a list, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what. Originally, I just planted these things because I liked them, but I have learned over time that they do have some benefits. So zinnias, I pretty much always plant these things. Zinnias, nasturtiums, cosmos, sunflowers, calendula, snapdragons, marigolds, mint, basil, borage, dill, cilantro. I'm probably forgetting some, but that's like the basics. I originally grew those things either one, because they are delicious and they're beautiful. And maybe they even have like calendula, I know has some like healing properties for salves and things. But honestly, I grew calendula originally because I just think it's beautiful. It makes me happy and it makes my garden look beautiful. So, but I have learned over time that one, like obviously flowers bring in pollinators, which is great. But they also can deter pests. Now, in my experience, you can't just plant one flower. It's not going to deter pests to have like one flower. Even the way I do it, where I plant flowers on the ends of every row, still really isn't always enough to deter enough pests. Like you really need to like interplant. And I don't always do that, but sometimes I do. So nasturtiums can deter aphids, squash bugs, and pumpkin beetles, and more, I think. Calendula can deter like a lot of insects. It said, when I was looking at it, it said most insects. I was shocked by that. Marigolds are like the kryptonite for bugs in the garden. Now, I also though think that you would have to plant such an immense amount of them to actually see these kinds of results. But because I've planted a lot of marigolds in my garden plenty of times, and I don't feel like they like totally deterred all the bugs or anything out of my garden. But it said bean beetles, nematodes, cabbage moths. The thing is bean beetles will also get on your potatoes. And there was one year that I literally planted marigolds down both sides, like literally, like tons of them down both sides of all of my potatoes, and I still had potato beetles. So yeah. Oh, mint can deter cabbage moths. Basil can deter flies and mosquitoes. Borage can deter tomato hornworm. Now, that's interesting to me because in my old garden, I had a lot of borage growing. And borage is a perennial, so it would come back every year like and spread, so I didn't ever have to really touch it. It was a great plant. And I almost never found tomato hornworms in my garden. Now, that could have just been circumstantial. It could have been because the borage was actually doing its job. So I found that really interesting. Now, here's the thing about planting mint, lemon balm, borage, but especially mint and lemon balm in your garden. I'm actually not going to plant those in my vegetable garden at this house. I planted them in my old vegetable garden because there was just so much space. I didn't mind having like the edges be wild. But in this garden, I want to be careful about what perennial like flowers and herbs I actually put into the garden. Now, this is the backyard here. The whole back of my property line will eventually be like a beautiful cottage herb garden, flower garden. So all of my mint, lemon balm, borage, echinacea, I could go on and on, will go back here on this fence line. But what I'm going to put in my garden this year will only be annuals. So I always put a ton of basil in my garden, all different kinds. Not just like the kind you think of for making pesto. My favorite is Tulsi basil. If you've ever smelled Tulsi basil, it literally makes you happy. So I plant that all over the place every year. It also grows a beautiful flower, and that flower looks really lovely in bouquets. And then you can put that in your bouquets, but then that person will smell their bouquet and they'll smell that Tulsi. And it makes them happy. Literally, Tulsi is used for depression, like the tincture, but the smell of it makes me happy. But I'll also plant other kinds of basil as well. And I typically interplant that with my tomatoes, just because basil and tomatoes make sense. I bet you there's a real reason for that. I bet you if I looked it up, I could find like a real reason why that works. And maybe I did once, and that's why I started doing that. But basil and tomatoes always made sense to me. So I did that. I will be putting all of the flowers I mentioned in my garden. And then I'll also be doing dill and cilantro in my garden as well. So, yeah. Yeah, mint is a forever plant. Now, don't be afraid to plant mint. Like, people get really afraid to plant mint because it will take over and it just loves to grow. So does lemon balm. It just loves to grow and spread. It's also really easy to pull out, but I guess be afraid to plant it if you really don't want it to be somewhere forever. But everywhere I've ever planted it, I didn't mind if it took over. I didn't mind if it was going to be there forever because I wanted that look to that area. Like I wanted it to be wild and, whimsical and kind of out of control. So that's why this whole back fence line is going to be like that one day. I'm going to start this year. I have lots of plans. It will take me years to complete them, but I'm going to start this year. The other lovely thing about that stuff is it spreads. So once you buy those plants or start those plants yourself or get them from someone else and put them in your garden, or wherever, they're super easy to like separate. They're super easy to dig up from somebody else's house and plant. They love to live. They're like weeds. They're like really nice weeds. They're there forever and they will spread and take over. And if you want that to happen, that's a really good thing. Otherwise, plant them in a pot. Okay. Any more questions? About the garden? Does garlic keep your chickens out of the garden? I mean, I have never experienced that. Chickens do whatever they want. I think the only thing that keeps chickens out of a garden is a really tall fence and a dog. And even then, they'll still get in there. Oh goodness, someone's talking about peppers. Yeah, I didn't even talk about peppers in my summer garden. Well, that is something I will grow. I don't typically grow a year's worth. We don't eat a whole lot of frozen peppers. We just don't really like the way that they taste. We might throw them in a stir fry or some chili or something, but mostly I just grow peppers for making some hot sauce. Well, Arthur always did that. I don't know if I will, but I will at least grow some because I like fermented peppers or fermented like jalapenos and things like that are literally one of my favorite foods. So I will grow some to do that with, and just some to eat on, but I won't grow a year's worth of bell peppers. Any tips for bell peppers? I don't have a lot of tips for them. I know that if you pluck off the top, they'll bush out and produce more. I know that they like hot weather. I know that they, in my experience, don't want to be babied. Like they're not like a lot of vegetable plants where they need babying. So maybe you're babying them too much. I don't know. But if I were you, I would ask someone who lives where you live and find out what they do to grow peppers because it could be something about your area. Um, anyway, checking text messages. Yeah. Any more questions? Ground cherries. I have never planted a ground cherry before in my life. Heat is not a problem because you live in Florida, but is it wet? Peppers, like, I think peppers kind of don't want it too wet either. So maybe it's too wet. I would really just ask somebody that lives in your area. Sometimes the problem is that you're growing the wrong variety. Varieties matter. You know, it's really important to get, if you're going to buy starts, that you're going to get starts from somewhere local. And I don't mean Lowe's because Lowe's is going to just sell the same plants in every part of the country. Go to a local greenhouse, talk to them. And if they actually have a garden, ask them, what does well in your garden? That's the people you want to talk to, or friends that have more experience than you. And that's where you want to get your plants. So it's probably the variety you're growing. Could be something in your soil. You could have too rich of soil. If I remember correctly, and now I'm not an expert on peppers because I really don't grow them to any kind of significance. I kind of just like throw them in there. And if they fruit for me, great. If they don't, I don't care. But I feel like they kind of like, they don't like a lot of fertilization. They don't like super rich soil. They like it hot and pretty dry. I could be wrong about that though. So yeah, I would ask somebody in your area. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about was children in the garden. I probably should have started that earlier because probably if you have young kids, you are going to bed soon. Okay, she's saying, okay. So Debbie, I would really just ask somebody for the variety of bell peppers that they grow that does well for them. Children in the garden. So I realize I've been very spoiled because I had this incredible fence around my garden that I could just latch the gate and the children could not get out of the garden. And when I had that, I had areas of the garden that were shaded and I would set up play areas for them, piles of dirt, sandboxes, little baby pools. I cannot tell you. I bet you if I went to the farm today, I could find 20 toys in that garden. So we kept toys up there, little trucks, and they had their own trowels and they just played. So that's how I've always gardened with children is I locked them in the garden with me, um, and set up areas in the garden for them to play in. Yeah, and as they got older, they got their own little space to garden, so that gave them more interest in being in the garden. It's interesting how much children want ownership. Like, it's not in my experience, it wasn't good enough, like, it wasn't satisfying enough for the kids that this was our garden and we were all gonna benefit from growing all this food. No, they needed their own place. And so, uh, they needed their own place to garden, and so I would give them that, and sometimes they would keep it up and sometimes they wouldn't, and honestly, I didn't stress about it. If they wanted help, I would help them. If they didn't care, I was fine with that. I didn't My goal wasn't for them to be perfect gardeners. My goal was for them to enjoy being in the garden and, like, being with me. So, with little kids, that's what I've done in the past, though, is just set up play areas in the garden and lock them in with me. This is a lot different here. There's no fence. There's no way to lock the babies in. They hate the playpen. Hate it. It doesn't matter. They might play in there for 5 minutes if I put a toy in there that they like. But they very quickly realize they're not free and they want to be free. So, I'm not sure yet exactly. Like, my one plan is to turn that one raised bed in my yard into a sandbox, like a covered sandbox, like for shade. They do play in there for good amounts of time already. It's just it's black dirt right now, and black dirt is really hard to get out of clothes. Um, so that's one idea. I'm sure like a little play pool, little kiddie pool. But right now what I've been doing is gardening during nap time. And also I have the kids take turns watching them. So I just have them take shifts. And thankfully, like, my older kids are they don't mind, especially when I'm like, okay, it's just 30 minutes, you have a 30-minute shift with the babies. They typically don't mind doing that, which that's a blessing. Now, one thing I do with older children, this is something we've always done and it's worked really well for us, is that we do require them to help in the garden, but we don't make them help the whole time. So we would it's usually a 30-minute timer. And we'd say everyone has to do focused work in the garden together for 30 minutes. And then when we're done, when the 30 minutes is over, you can go do whatever you want. You can stay in the garden, you can keep working, you can go play, whatever. And that always works super well for us because you can get a whole lot done with that many people focused for 30 minutes. And typically I find when children have a boundary, an expectation, a goal, things like that, they do really, really well. And maybe your kid needs a 10-minute timer, not a 30-minute timer, because it's not something that they're used to doing. And then you could gradually increase that if you wanted to, or keep it at 10 minutes. But that is how I get my older kids to work in the garden. Typically, when we had the farm, I didn't really have to do that with like farm work. They really loved working with the animals and they did like working in the garden. It just wasn't always like their first choice. Now, I have some kids who would stay in the garden with me the whole time. Brighton, my 7-year-old, he loves to be in the garden. He'll be like, "Mom, can I come work in the garden with you?" And yes, I would love it. Wilder too, he's 4. He's still at the age where he just loves to do everything I'm doing. I mean, he's starting to phase out of that age where he wants to go do his own thing. But there's that age where children just want to do what you're doing. They just want to be with you. And if you could give a 10-year-old the excitement of obedience and work as a 2-year-old, I mean, that would be, I wish I had the excitement for work that a 2-year-old does. It's an incredible thing. But alas, 2-year-olds have the excitement, but they don't have the fine motor skills and all that stuff. But Wilder is at an age where he really likes to help me, but he's starting to want to do his own thing. But I would say Brighton is my number one gardener. Joyful really likes to be in the garden with me. I don't know that it's so much about gardening for her. I think she just likes to be with me, and that makes me happy. So, yeah, that's kind of how I deal with kids in the garden. I'm still figuring out what I'm going to do with the extremely mobile twin toddlers. It's a big challenge. But I have to remind myself that like this is just a garden. Grocery stores exist. If I don't get it done perfectly, it's really okay. And not to stress about it too much, because thankfully we do live in an age where We can buy food if we need to. We can order bulk from places. I can order 100 pounds of, I can order a couple 100 pounds of potatoes if I can afford it, from Azure. If not, I can go every week to the local grocery store and get potatoes, or corn or whatever. It's just I would prefer to grow it because it makes me happy and I like the idea. I feel like it's more nutritive for my children and it's good for our family to have something to work towards and work around. So, yeah, but it's not the end of the world if it's not perfect, which is great. That's lovely. That's a lovely position to be in where you can choose to garden. I mean, it's like no pressure, no pressure. If you're just learning to garden, there's no pressure. Like you're not going to die if you don't do it perfectly. You're not going to die if your crop fails. Um, Obviously we want to do well, right? We all want to be excellent. We want to do our best, but it's like okay if we don't. And I also like to say and like remind people like a garden is a gracious friend. I say that all the time because it really is. Gardens will produce even if you neglect them. Will they produce as much as if you had been perfectly efficient and had perfect soil and had a perfect weather? No, but they will still produce. And it's really not only about the fruit, guys. It's and I know most of you garden, so you get this. It's also just about being out there. It feels amazing. It's your hands in the dirt, the sun on your face, you know, um, hearing the water fall down on the plants, the smell after a rain, the growth after a rain, watching this thing happen right before your eyes. Like it's so funny. It took me years, and I'm still kind of like I still kind of feel this way. But I remember for a couple of years when I first started gardening, really started gardening, I almost didn't believe it was going to work. Have you guys ever felt like that? Um, every year I'd be like, we'll see what happens. And then be shocked when it worked. Like food actually grew. And that's because God made it that things want to grow. They want to grow and let the garden be your friend. Like don't make it into this stressful project. Like let it be something lovely to you. Let it be something that you enjoy. You'll have a better garden if you enjoy it. You'll want to go out there. You'll want to be out there and you'll want to weed. I did put down weed cover landscaping fabric on my garden this year just because I'm trying to be realistic about how much time I have to weed. But I actually really enjoy weeding. It's therapy for me. It's quiet. It's like I have something to do with my hands, so I'm not bored, but I'm just able to like think quietly or not think at all, totally zone out. I don't listen to podcasts or anything while I weed. I just enjoy it. And that's another thing is I don't mind weeds in my garden. Now I do feel pressure, some weeds. I do feel pressure here to keep it immaculate, and that's kind of stressful to me. But that's another reason I put down weed cover. But I actually I like the way weeds look. Obviously, don't the whole thing ever run, but a lot of gardens, that's how they end up by the end of the summer. It's a lot of work to keep up a garden. But I like some weeds in the garden. I think it's pretty. I like how whimsical it looks. I like how real it looks. It's like messy but beautiful, and that's life. It's like a metaphor. Okay. I am getting tired, and when I get tired, I start to ramble. So I'm going to end this really soon. I have never done a live for this long. It's an hour and 40 minutes now. And we didn't even get to the end of the question, so I'm sorry about that. We did get to page 3. Oh, we got close to the end. Great. Well, I'm going to open it up for a few questions. And if you felt like you really wanted to ask a question and I didn't answer it, please ask away. I'm trying to think if there's anything I can talk about while I wait for you guys to ask your questions. Maybe I'll go back. I love how you guys are talking to each other in the live chat. And I love how chill this live chat has been. It's been, like, so calm. You guys are, like, giving each other advice, talking to each other, answering each other's questions. Um, I just love it so much. I don't even I just need to come to the live and sit here and let you guys talk in the live chat. It's pretty great. Oh, I know one thing I forgot to mention was pest control. So the ways I know for pest control are netting. So that's the only way I know how to grow organic broccoli and cabbage. Is and if your flea beetles and stuff are really bad, I mean, it would be the only way because flea beetles really get your anyway, they really get your kales and stuff too, so you might would need to cover those. I've never had to cover my kales though, my greens and stuff, but I am this year because of the deer. But that's the netting is the only way I've ever known to grow cabbage, broccoli, things like that, organically. So the next thing is one big thing we do is we just go out there and we literally pick the bugs off and kill them. We look on every leaf, we look for eggs, we look for bugs, and we kill them. That's another way. Honestly, I don't love that job. I like weeding. I don't really like that job. Another way is you can plant, pest deterrents with flowers and herbs and different things, but it does take a lot, I feel like, in order to do that. Now, there's also things that you can spray that are organic. But I honestly, that was always Arthur's thing. Like I never really learned what those things were. He might would hand me something and say, "Go spray the beans" or something. But that, how sometimes like someone just kind of has a job and you have a job, and so I'm gonna have to learn that this year for sure. One of the main ones I want to figure out is the squash vine borers because I want a winter squash harvest. Squash vine borers are the worst because they will take out your whole crop. It's not like the bean beetles that you can still get a crop of beans. So, anyway, netting, literally squashing with your hands, flowers and things that deter pests, but then there are sprays. I just need to go learn what they are because I don't really know what they are. Yeah, someone's saying neem oil. I do remember that. I also know though with like sprays and stuff, you have to be careful or you'll kill your pollinators. Diatomaceous earth and organic sprays will also kill your pollinators. So you do have to be careful about when you spray that stuff on. And even organic stuff, you have to be careful. I remember because some stuff like, yeah, it's organic, but you still can't eat the produce until for like 3 days or something. So that kind of makes me suspect. But I'm not against using something like that if it's really not that big of a deal. I would just need to read about it. Someone's saying rhubarb around the garden is great at preventing deer. That's really interesting. Did I miss some questions? Did I work a garden as a child? I actually answered that earlier on. No, I didn't. I do remember in one house I lived in, my mom had one little square foot garden in the backyard. She grew up with a huge garden. Her dad, my papa, and he had a huge garden when I was growing up, but I didn't see him all the time. He didn't live that close. He's still alive. Actually, my grandparents are in their 90s and they still drive themselves everywhere, live on their own. They're amazing. They've been married forever. And he does still have a garden, but just flowers. He doesn't grow vegetables anymore. But then growing up, my mom at one of the houses we lived in had one little square foot garden, just one. But now, my mom gardens more now. She has a bunch of raised beds out on her deck and stuff, and we're always talking about gardening and stuff. It's fun. I love sharing that with her. What variety of tomatoes do you grow for sauce? I already did cover that, but it was like an hour ago. So, Amish paste or San Marzano, those are the 2. Amish paste are indeterminates and Marzano is a determinate, so you'll just need to decide, like, what works best for you, and there's other varieties too, but those are the 2 I have grown. Um, do I put shade over any vegetables? I haven't ever, but I may try this year. I don't know. I was thinking about trying so that I could extend my lettuce crop and stuff, but I also need more space for my summer garden, so I don't know that I wanna extend my lettuces into the summer because I really need some more space for my summer garden, so we'll see. A lot of people asking how my eyes are. I'm sorry. I've answered that a bunch. I'm happy to answer it again, but that's why I don't always answer that question. My eyes are great. I haven't needed shots in my eyes in a long time. And what's crazy is that my eye condition is caused by high cortisol. One of the things they think causes it is high cortisol levels, which is stress, and I have been so stressed and my eyes have been fine. So I'm just praying that that means my eyes are healed. I really hope so. Oh, another person is saying that the deer ate all of her rhubarb and the leaves, and the leaves are poison. That's so interesting. It's interesting. That's another thing about gardening. Not everything works for everyone. You really and I actually love that. I love that there's not always a formula. I love that, like, you gotta figure it out. I love that, like, you have to, like, tweak it and learn it, and it's just often very specific to your soil and your even your own yard. I love that about it. It can be very frustrating, but it's kinda great that in a world where it feels like everything is just you can find out the answer to anything. You can find out the information to anything, and you can with gardening, but you still have to do it to actually learn it. You still have to experience it to get good at it, and I like that. I feel like it's kinda sticking it to the man. That's kinda how I feel like gardening is. It's like an act of rebellion in a good way. So that's the funniest question. Am I glad I got that splinter out of my finger? Well, let me tell you, I'm glad I filmed it because that's our most watched video we've ever made. My splinter video. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and see, but there's a video that where I take a splinter out from under my fingernail. It's like a 1 minute video and it has insane amount of views on it. It's hilarious. If you get a bumper crop of something, offer the neighbors. Yeah, if I get a bumper crop, offer it to the neighbors. Yeah, of course. What's the fun of a garden if you don't share it? Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of having a garden is sharing your bounty, right? And I know one thing the kids are really excited about is something they've always done is had like a little table at the end of the driveway at our old place, even though there weren't that many people. Here, there's a lot more people, but they would sell vegetables and flower bouquets, and they would do pretty well because kids like to buy people like to buy stuff from kids and overpay them. So they're pretty excited to do that here. I think that'll be fun. I really think that the garden is going to at least help. I mean, it so far has already helped me meet my neighbors. So I'm hoping it stays a really positive experience for me, for the neighborhood. I don't have like big, wild visions of it becoming this big community thing, but so far it's already though like helped me meet my neighbors, and that's been really fun. So, uh, alrighty, guys. I feel like there was one more. Oh, this has nothing to do with gardening, but I had saw someone ask me about my bracelets that I always wear, and I usually wouldn't answer that just because like but these are really special to me. So these are from a really incredible jewelry maker. Her website is Yearly Co. And they are, do you see that? They are birthstone bangles. So each one represents one of my children and it has their birthstone on it. I don't have all of them because they're expensive, but over the years I just slowly acquired them because they're just very expensive, and I still need to get some. So I hope to do that one day. And each kid they love it because I've said, like, this is yours. Like, one day I'm going to give this to you. And, I'll have been wearing it almost your whole life. And, you'll just always be able to have it once I am older. I'm not going to say like when I die, but when I'm older, like an old lady, I'm going to give it to them and it will be theirs to keep. And they'll come up to me like, can I hold my bracelet? It's just something special. Means a lot to me, means a lot to them. So yeah, Yearly Co. is where I get them. Cool. Hey, Country Mouse Farmhouse is a really long live. I don't know if you'll ever be able to watch the whole thing, but I'm glad you got to make it at the end. Thank you, John. Juggling life with purpose. Yeah, that's what they stand for. I really, really love them. She makes one that has like a North Star on it, and I want to get that one for me in rose gold. I don't know. I there's very few things that I find that like I really love as far as like material items. And I'm not saying that makes me better or worse than anybody, but when I find something that I like, I tend to love it. So like there's these mugs, this pottery that I love. I love it. So I've like been collecting these mugs. They're all different colors. These bracelets, like I love them. And I actually looked all over the internet for a less expensive option. I couldn't find one that was as pretty as these and as well made. But they have one that's called like the North Star bangle. And I want to get that one for me in the rose gold instead of the yellow gold, just to kind of represent the last year of my life and that I made it through. And, there's a lot more to it in my heart that I think it'll be too cheesy to share out loud. Anyways. Oh, where did I get the mugs in? Okay. I forget that I share things some places that I don't share others. So I talked all about these on Instagram yesterday, but I get these mugs. They're really sturdy, hefty mugs, and they're restaurant quality. They're restaurant wear, so they don't break so easy. They're from East Fork Pottery, which is a local pottery company. Now, they're a pretty big company, but they're still a small business, and they make the most beautiful, simple, but beautiful pottery. And their pottery comes in all these different colors. And they only have a few colors that like core colors, like they always have them. The rest of them just come out like, and I think twice a year they come out with new glazes. And then once they've sold out of that, they don't have it anymore. So you can't get it anymore unless you find it used. So that's something that I've been doing over the last few years, is collecting these in the different colors. And yeah, so East Fork Pottery, I love them so much. I mean, it's just a coffee cup, but it's something that I like and enjoy, and it makes me happy. Okay, sounds like we're done talking about gardening for the night. We're talking about coffee mugs and bracelets. I really appreciate all of you. I really enjoyed this live. I liked that it was just, there's 500 of us, but it was still really, really nice. What I'm saying is, I was gonna say it's smaller live. It is smaller. It's not a couple thousand people. It was 500 people. It was lovely. It was lovely being able to read the chat and hang out with you guys a little bit more intimately. So anyways, I'm going to go. I can hardly keep my eyes open. I hope you guys have a great night, and I hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow. If you're celebrating Easter with your family and rejoicing that he is risen. And yeah, see you next time. Have a great night.